Today you are attending Nuestra Salud, taking care of self while taking care of others, with Dr. Maria Cuendo, Chair of Psychiatry at University of Pennsylvania, past World Psychiatric Association President, past American Psychiatric Association President, first Latina American Psychiatric Association President. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Homan Sandoval, past National Executive Director of LMSA, currently on the National FPAC Council. And I think I am on Zoom twice. Let me mute myself. Okay, I'm muted. I am a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and today we wanted to explain the unique stressors of serving as a LHS Plus faculty, Latino, Hispanic, Spanish origin member, or senior academic leader, identify resilience building strategies to succeed in academia, apply strategies to support mental and emotional being, and inspire attendees to amplify the learned psychoeducation resources on social media today. Today is not establishing a physician-patient relationship, and the resources and advice we are giving, we are hoping to be helpful for you and your peers. But if you or someone you know is struggling with suicide or suicidal ideations, these are some resources that can be helpful. I hope you all have already heard about it. If you haven't, it's a wonderful resource, the physiciansupportline.com, which was a group of psychiatrists who volunteered early on in the pandemic to support our fellow physicians and their mental health. So very quickly, because I want to leave the majority of time for Dr. Cuendo, I just want to touch on slightly what the first part of Líderes this summer we looked at, because I think one of the things that I've been noticing is the healing part of validation for ourselves and for our mentees. And one of the things that I think hasn't gotten a lot of discussion are what are the unique stressors for serving as Latino LHS Plus identified faculty member or senior academic leader. So some of those include lower parental wealth. The AAMC MSQ shows some of that, high student loans, higher ACEs scores, soft skills overtaxed but overlooked, microaggressions historically excluded, i.e., the old term of underrepresented, the brown tax. Again and again, all of these on this list I hear at these meetings year after year after year. And I see friends coming back, and what we hear and tell each other is how helpful and healing it is to our souls to be able to be validated that yes, these things are occurring, and it does make our careers, that much more challenging. Latinas, our role sometimes in our culture, in the family, and then for our IMG colleagues, visa challenges and the many other challenges that they face. So this is my particular story. These are my grandparents. They immigrated to the US. My dad was 5. My grandpa came to work on the railroad. ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. Many of you have probably heard a lot of the research, through the American Academy of Pediatrics, but especially in immigrant populations, these numbers are quite higher. There's known to be a higher rate of trauma in crossing the border. For me, and I think for many of us, knowing about our population's children still being in detention, and knowing about, our friends and children still fighting, for DACA. This is something that kind of continues to be a stressor for us on top of everything else. So being the only one. So this is one of my favorite photos of all time from LMSA. And this is actually where the president stands for Inauguration Day. And this was at an NHMA meeting. And these are all former LMSA leaders and now NHMA members and leaders and LMSA advisors. And I love this picture. Here's a picture about, being the only one trying to do it all. And it's, so one of the things with resilience and resiliency is knowing your values and being able to work towards your values, and especially with a community and feeling that you belong to a community. And so during the pandemic earlier on, there were many of us that were very much feeling overwhelmed and afraid and many difficult emotions. And we came together, Dr. Oliveira thought of it, and we made this amazing video that highlighted Latinos in all different medical specialties. And we actually had it to a Mark Anthony song, and he retweeted it. And then we also posted the Latina physicians showing all of us getting our vaccines. But that community really helped so many of us with our resilience through COVID. Just again, very briefly, but feedback I got from last conference was that, okay, yes, we have these challenges, these stressors, but what can we do? There's strong evidence for evidence-based therapy, including cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, mindfulness. I do strongly encourage individuals to seek out therapists, but how you are filtering your world around you, how you're perceiving it, can greatly influence your moods. And if you don't know about this, Beck's thought distortions are a great thing to learn about and review, especially when your amygdala is really kicking in. Even though rationally you might know about these things, you might be falling into this pattern again. DBT, the key there that I like to think about is kind of balancing your amygdala and your prefrontal cortex and coming to a wise mind state. And there's a lot of evidence that using mindfulness techniques and practicing that daily can help. With that, I would like to introduce Dr. Oquendo. She is MD, PhD, who served as past president of the American Psychiatric Association from 2017 to 2020, and as president of APA from 2016 to 2017. She is professor and chairman of psychiatry at the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. She previously served as professor of psychiatry at Columbia University and research psychiatrist at the New York State Psychiatric Institute. I could use the whole rest of the time reading her bio, and I'm not going to do that because it's going to be so much more helpful to actually hear her words from her herself. So thank you again so much, Dr. Oquendo, for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm sorry that I can't be there in person. I'm actually speaking to you from my father's house in Puerto Rico. He's 90 years old, and I try to come every other month to see him and check on him. And this conference coincided with a time when I had made plans to go and be with him. So thank you for understanding. So I'm going to speak very quickly, which is something that I'm very famous for, and cover a couple of different aspects. First, I'm going to talk about tools that help me navigate differences between my culture and that of academic medicine. I'm going to talk about the importance of cultivating resilience. I'm going to talk about strategies for emotional well-being, and then shift to strategies for success, because I think it's really important to emphasize that. And end with some comments about work-life balance. So maybe I can tell you a little bit about my own background. I come from a family where both my parents were both Hispanic, but from two different cultures. My father from Puerto Rico and my mother from Spain. But they had many things in common, including the fact that they were extremely conservative, especially in their views about what women and girls should be allowed to do. The other thing is that my mother had a high school education, very intelligent woman, but only had a high school education. And my father had been fortunate to obtain an MD degree in Spain, which is where they met. I grew up as a military brat on Air Force bases, moving a lot. And that's where I learned to speak English, for which I'm very grateful. And not only through military life, but also at home, I was extremely overprotected. So when I decided to leave for college, I had literally never gone out on a date without a chaperone, and the chaperone was my grandmother. So it gives you a sense of where I was coming from. And then I went away to college, to a small university outside of Boston named Tufts. And I was just I was like in a candy shop. And I said, I don't think I can ever go back. And it's true that I never moved back to Puerto Rico, although I love Puerto Rico and come here often. And I've now lived in the Eastern Seaboard for a very long time. So many things about my background did not prepare me for the culture of academic medicine. And I think probably the most shocking thing to me was to navigate through every day and hear how people were very comfortable telling me about their accomplishments. Now, I don't know if you come from a culture like that. Many of us Latinos do, where that is like not okay. Like you don't go around telling people how you did this and you're able to do that and aren't you fabulous? But I also figured out that if you don't learn how to do that, people are never going to know. And you're also not going to shine in the way that you could for your accomplishments. So one of the things that I learned to do was to do what many people now refer to as humble brag. And for example, if I had just received a new grant from the federal government, I might say something like, oh my goodness, I'm so stressed out. I just have to turn in the paperwork for my grant and the deadline is tomorrow or whatever. But you get the idea. The idea is that you communicate a success in a way that's comfortable for you and let people know the great things that you're doing and all of your accomplishments in that way. I found that to be really helpful, and it allowed me a way of communicating in real time about what I was doing and what I was working on. The other thing that I think is really important and has been mentioned, Elizabeth mentioned it, but also in the prior talks, there were mentions about microaggressions and their role. And I just want to tell you a brief vignette of something that happened to me. And I know not all Latinos are brown or black, and I know not all Latinos have accents, but many of us have both of those things. And it's not uncommon to be subject to microaggressions. And I had this experience about 5 years ago where I was going to give a lecture at Harvard at a conference. And I walked up to the registration desk and gave my name to the young woman, white woman, who was behind the desk and said that I was registered for the conference. So she looked through her files and was looking for a badge to give me. And she said, oh, I don't have your name. I don't think you're registered. And I said to her, that's peculiar. I'm supposed to give her. She couldn't imagine that someone who looked like me, and mind you, I was wearing a suit, but she couldn't imagine that someone who looked like me would actually be a professor, someone to give a conference lecture. And so I was very distraught in the moment, and then I pulled myself together. And what I'm going to tell you now is that I find it very, very helpful to not take these things personally, because it's really not about me. It's not about whether I'm successful or not successful, or whether people want to come and listen to me speak. It's really about the other person. And if you can train yourself to take microaggressions in that type of stance, I think that it'll make it a lot easier to handle them. And I have to say that I am hopeful that things will start to change and that microaggressions perhaps will become less and less common. But while I'm hopeful, I think it will take a very long time. So I think that we need, as Latinos, to dress ourselves in strength and remember that these types of behaviors and comments are not personal. They're not about us. They're about the person saying them. The other thing that I found was very useful was to not be shy about using your minority status to make sure that you're getting what you deserve. In fact, when I was negotiating to be the chairman of Penn, I was negotiating for my salary with a very powerful CEO who I have very deep admiration for. And he was telling me what my salary was going to be, and I just didn't think it was high enough. And negotiator too. But I wanted to him, well, let me just say this to you. I don't want to get to Penn and find out that the only Latina woman has the lowest salary amongst all of the chairs. I thought he was going to fall off his seat. He didn't increase my salary, but he did supplement it with other financial support for things like housing and transportation and things like that. And I figure that my race and my ethnicity is used against me every day. And if I can use it to my advantage, I'm not shy. The other thing that I think has been mentioned several times during this meeting is the brown tax or the minority tax. And Elizabeth certainly referred to that. And I think that it's very important to be mindful of that. And these days, when so many universities, medical schools and health systems are trying to change their culture, they're calling on us more and more to help in that regard. And that's challenging in many ways. For me, I often remind people, is like, I'm happy to help, but you have to remember that this is not my content area. So I am not an expert on changing culture to decrease racism, even though I have a tremendous amount of lived experience, but I'm willing to help. I think we need to be mindful of the fact that we may be called upon to participate in these kinds of activities much more than anyone else. And I think that we need to be able to speak up and say, I'd love to help, but I'm already doing this A, B, C, and D, and I really can't take on another commitment, but let me help you identify other people. I think that is a really important part of being able to navigate academic medicine in general. And I think learning to say no is really critical. And I'm going to talk a little later about not only learning to say no, but also learning to say yes, which is equally important. So what about building resilience? So one thing that I think is really important for us all to remember is that stress and anxiety is a part of life. And it's definitely a part of life in academic medicine. The only way that you can be free of stress and free of anxiety is if you're dead. And most of us don't really want to be there. So I think that we need to be mindful that that is something that we need to expect and anticipate. And you need to learn to tolerate stress, and you need to learn to tolerate the anxiety. It's part of learning to be a doctor. It's part of learning to be an academic. It's part of learning to be a leader. And you can't expect your program director, your boss, your mentor to eliminate stress and anxiety. Because if you do, you're just going to end up being angry, disappointed, overwhelmed, maybe even burnt out. And worse, it'll decrease your resilience because you will start to believe that you are unable to tolerate stress or anxiety. And that is the last thing you need. You should expect, however, to have people express appreciation for all of the things that you're doing. And I think that as we change cultures in medicine, that is becoming more and more part of the culture. So what about building resilience? What does it take to build resilience? Well, we're very lucky in medicine that we have opportunities almost every day to build our resilience. And the reason I say that is that one of the best ways to build resilience is through altruism, right? And I think that making sure that you do everything you can to be helpful to others, even when you're feeling a little spent. Because in fact, when you do that type of thing, it actually makes you feel stronger and you become more resilient. And we have opportunities every day to do this, whether we're taking care of patients or we're teaching students or residents or trainees, or we are working in our communities. There are opportunities for altruism every single day, and we should take advantage of them and be aware that that's what we're doing. You'll find that it's really extremely helpful. The other thing that is very important for building resilience is gratitude. And now everyone has days where you can't imagine that you actually have anything to be grateful for because things are really difficult. But find ways, even if it's through small things, to be grateful for something. And I find every evening before I go to sleep, I try to find 3 things that I can be grateful for. And sometimes it's very simple things. I have a tiny little orchid in my kitchen that has flowers, and it flowers very often. And sometimes that's one of the things that I'm feeling grateful for because maybe I had a very difficult day. Expressing your gratitude to yourself and to others is something that is extremely beneficial and can help you feel stronger. And like there are things that are positive in your life. I also strongly encourage the use of peer support and peer supervision. And so I happen to be a psychiatrist, and many times the patients that we treat, because they have emotional and mental health problems, are very difficult to manage. And making sure, even if you're the attending, even if you're the professor, making sure that you allow yourself the time to talk to your peers about your own reactions, how it makes you feel, and ways in which you might cope with it can be extremely helpful and healing. And finally, I think it's also very important to find time to do the things you love to do, even if they're little things. Maybe sometimes the only thing you have time to do is listen to some music while you're doing the dishes. But that type of thing is really important also to helping us feel like there's something special that we can enjoy every single day. Now, having said that, you should build your resilience and given you some tips on how to do it, I think it's really important to get help if you need it. And I'll just spend a few seconds talking about burnout versus depression, because I think these days it's very easy for people to say that they're burnt out, and much more difficult still for people to say that they have major depression. And if you look at the literature, the overlap between these two constructs is extremely high. And so you need to be honest with yourself about whether what you're dealing with is burnout or whether you're depressed and you need to go and talk to someone and see someone. I think that the generation, the last couple of generations coming through medical school and residency training than my generation was in terms of embracing mental health, rejecting stigma about psychiatric problems and mental health problems, and also about being open to getting help. And that's important because physicians are often very, very slow to get help. There's a lot of pressure in medicine to appear to be stoic and strong. And also, there are things that we worry about, right? We worry about privacy. Is my training director going to find out? Is my boss going to find out? In fact, we know that training directors are every day getting more and more information from the ACGME about the importance of ensuring that their trainees have access to solid mental health resources, and they're very sensitized to that. The other thing that's been very fortunate through the pandemic is the robust take-up of telehealth, which allows us to obtain treatment without necessarily having to travel or sit in a waiting room or feel like other people can tell where we are. So I think that's another thing that is really very useful. Another deterrent is people's concern about what will happen to their career. If I get help, will I have trouble with my license? Okay, thank you. So physicians are often slow to get help because in medicine, there's a tremendous pressure to appear to be perfect, to have everything under control, to be strong. But there are also worries about privacy. Oftentimes people worry that their training director is going to find out that they're in treatment. But in fact, we know, I can tell you because I was a training director for many years, the ACGME every single month gives more and more help to training directors about the importance of mental health and ensuring that trainees have access to mental health resources. And with the emergence of telehealth during the pandemic and its widespread use now, we're very fortunate because it really takes a lot less time to get help because you don't necessarily have to commute. You also have a lot more privacy because you could do it from your office or from your home. And that can make access a lot better for people who need help. And finally, oftentimes people worry about the impact on their career, about whether it'll have an impact on whether they can get a license, or there'll be stigma about whether they're weak. And I think that given the very significant impact that mental illness has on functioning, it's not just about being happy, it's also about how well you can do your job. It's really important to force yourself to set those things aside and get the help that you need. And I don't know, Dr. Sandoval, if the blurb that I gave about the difference between major depression and burnout came through. Were you able to hear that part?
Yes, we did.
Okay,
Yes.
terrific. Thank you. So I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about strategies for success because I think that's extremely important in terms of well-being. And one of the things that I want to encourage you to do is to find a mentor or a sponsor to set goals and generally advise you. And you might be wondering, well, what is a sponsor? A sponsor goes further than a mentor because what a sponsor does is open doors for you. So for example, my mentor in research would actually literally walk around with me during conferences and introduce me to the top researchers in our field. That's being a sponsor, right? He was opening doors so that I could actually already have a connection with these individuals. And it would be much less difficult for me to reach out to them by email or by phone if I wanted to engage with them in a conversation about collaborations, et cetera. But you also want to pay attention to some of the qualities of the mentor or sponsor, right? So it's not just that they should have a good track record of mentoring, but also the chemistry is important. And the reason it's important is that ideally, the mentorship relationship should last a lifetime. And I can tell you that the mentor that helped me really galvanize my career in terms of research was someone who I selected as a mentor in 1996. And I still call him today sometimes for advice. So good chemistry really helps. And the good mentor or sponsor will be very happy to give you advice about things like, well, what are the professional organizations you should be involved with? As I mentioned before, introducing you to national, international colleagues so that you can build your network, helping you get appointed to important committees, and also helping you set goals for yourself. If you're in research, for example, okay, you're supposed to publish papers. At what pace do I need to do that, right? Because if you have a sense of what the goalpost is, it's much easier to plan to do it, even though it's a very difficult task. The same with grants. What type of grants should I be applying for? What's the appropriate timeline for applying those grants? Also, what presentations should I be giving at what meetings of what topics? All of those things are great to discuss with a mentor or a sponsor. But it's not only about getting spoon-fed, right? You also have to learn the details. And I think it's really important that you learn about things like, what does it take to get promoted to associate professor? And find out what it is at your hospital or university that you need to do to make sure that you're on the path that you want to be, assuming that you want to be promoted academically or to have a leadership role. You want to know what is required so that you start collecting those kinds of experiences, backgrounds, education, etc. And in fact, you can ask things like, for example, how do I get on an editorial board? I was very shocked when I asked that question because the answer was, well, you can just ask the editor. And as an example of the using the minority status to my advantage, I actually did that and went to the editor of the American Journal of Psychiatry, which is one of the most important journals in psychiatry, and said, listen, you're just taking on this new editorship. And as your editorial board, I'd love to, and if you're interested in diversifying the board, I'd be happy to be appointed and help in that regard. And you know what? He appointed me. But I would have never thought to ask him had I not asked somebody else how to get on the editorial board. So I was saying something about saying no before, but let me talk to you about saying yes. I think it's really important to be able to say yes as often as you can. You can't always say yes. Of course, that's absurd. But you don't want to be known as the person who's always saying no because you're protecting your time. And if you have to say no, say it gracefully. So, for example, I oftentimes, although I say yes often to doing reviews, which is a lot of work for reviews for NIH, or to collaborations or to committee work, when I have to say no, and that happens too, I try to say, I really would love to be able to do this, but I have a grant due. Or like in the case of this conference, I really would have loved to be there in Philadelphia with you all, but I had a commitment to come and see my father. And so I said, I really would love to do it. I could do it virtually, but sometimes you can't even do it virtually, right? You just have to say, I have another commitment for that, but please keep me in mind for the future, because that's really important, to be viewed as someone who's open to help other people. And that goes back to the whole issue about building your resilience through altruism and cooperation. And the point about making sure that people know that you're open to work in the future is really important about cultivating that image of yourself. The other thing that I wanted to mention is the importance of doing the right thing, helping other people. I already talked about altruism, and many of us as Latinos have the opportunity to help the next generation. And I was listening intently to the conversation just before this lecture about how important it is for the next generation to come and talk to us, ask us how we did it, what things did we find helpful and what things didn't help, so that the leaders have an opportunity for altruism and you get the benefit of their experience. I think the other thing that is really important to keep in mind is that being friendly and collaborative goes a very long way, because people will know you for that. And it means also that when you're up for promotion, for example, and people around the country need to write letters to support your promotion, if you're a nice person and really collaborative, they're much more likely to do it and to do it fast. The other thing is that it is true that sometimes you have to do things you'd rather not do, because citizenship matters, right? So you might have to take a call, an overnight call, because someone else is ill. And that's the kind of thing that people remember, right? Who's the person who is willing to help when the organization is in a pinch? And I think that's really, really important. The other thing that I would say to you is that I find that it's really important to find a nice thing to say about people when you see them. It doesn't have to be anything profound. I typically love to say to people, it's like, I just heard from so-and-so that you gave a great presentation. It's important to tell the truth, but there are oftentimes opportunities to say things like that. Or, I've been so impressed on what a great job you've done in leading this committee, or how productive you've been. And that means that people will have a very positive association to you. And every time they see you, they'll want to talk to you, because they know you're going to say something nice to them. And keeping that type of attitude, I think, really helps. And it's also very salubrious for the culture that you live in, right? If people are nice to each other, it makes it a lot easier to tolerate the hard work that we all have to do. So in the last few minutes, let me just talk about work-life balance, because you might be thinking, okay, well, but what about having fun? What about living my life and, taking care of my family and my friends and relaxing? So today, more than ever, people are concerned about this work-life balance. And, the medical students talk about it, and the residents and the faculty. And I have something of a skewed perspective. In fact, my husband jokes that, one time I told him I was asked to give a work-life balance lecture. So like, well, what do you know about it? All you do is work, because I love to work. But the truth is that I have a colleague in radiology here at Penn who says, talking about work-life balance implies that your work is not part of your life. And I think that's a very important point. Of course, when she said that, I laughed hysterically, but it's really, really true. I love my work. I love the research. I love writing. I even love writing grants. And I don't like not getting grants, but the truth is that I think of writing a grant as writing to Santa Claus. And if I'm really lucky, I'll get $1 million and be able to do this very cool study, right? So, having some optimism and remembering why you chose to go into academia or into medicine, right? You chose this career because you loved it. There were things about it that were incredibly appealing to you. Maybe it was because you wanted to help other people. Maybe it's because you really love science and physiology. Whatever it is, there are things that drove you to take all of those difficult courses, to prepare for those challenging exams, to do all that really exhausting training. It's because there were things about it that you loved. And I'm not going to try to tell you that it isn't difficult to be a physician. And it gets much more challenging with every passing minute, it seems, right? Think about all the time you have to spend now documenting your work in the electronic health record, or doing the paperwork to get yourself paid or to be credentialed. I mean, it's like never ending. But the key here really is optimism. So focusing on the things that you really still love about your work, thinking about the gratitude that a patient expresses to you when you take care of them and help them. Or sometimes you can't make them better, but they're grateful for your kindness. Those are things that are very fulfilling. And I would say that if you're feeling like things are very difficult at work, making a little bit of extra time to do the things you love to do, and that might be teaching medical students, or it might be mentoring and sponsoring younger people, or getting involved with the community. Maybe your hospital or your university has organizations within it that deal with the community, maybe getting involved with that. But doing that is really important, because it'll help you keep in mind, front and center, what things you love about being a physician, and make it a lot easier to tolerate the things that we all really kind of don't like about about being a physician and all of the work that goes along with it. So think about the things that give you joy. Think about the things that make you love your career. Focus on that. And that's how the fun starts. So I want to thank you for your attention. And we do have 10 minutes for questions if anyone wants to ask anything or make any comments. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Quendo. Do we have any questions? Please feel free, those of you virtually, to put your questions in the chat. Looks like we do have a question back there. Do we have someone to help us with the microphone? No? All right.
Thank you so much. First of all, I'm going to start with your last part. This has been an incredible lecture and fantastic lecture. And I think that all the young people and the viejitos to be are going to take a lot of advantage. I have just one simple question. You mentioned that you had a great mentors, and I have been hearing around the conference that everybody has good mentors. But what is the attitude that a student has to take when the mentor say, well, I cannot help you because you are getting in competition with me?
So that's a really, really good question. And that's where the track record of the mentor is really important, because there are some mentors that do feel very threatened as their students become stronger. And so as you're thinking about it, and hopefully you have some options in terms of who can mentor you, look at who the mentees of the person have been. And if they're successful, that's a pretty good indication that even if the person feels threatened, they're strong enough to be able to support their mentees so that they can be successful. But I think that's a really important point. So I just want to respond to a comment that's in the chat about the message of increasing resilience worrisome. So I can understand where you're coming from, and I think that people really want culture to change, and I think that there is a lot of change. But I think we also have to help ourselves, and that there are strategies that you can use. It takes a long time to change culture. And so in the meantime, and that be a welcome message, but I think it's think about what's happened in the last 18 months since George Floyd's murder. Places really want to change their culture, but I can tell you where I am, it's starting to change, but it is very slow. So in the meantime, I'm going to build my resilience.
No, thank you very much for that comment. Actually, the one I'll have is follows on that. But first of all, really wonderful presentation. So thank you so much for really inspiring us on wellness for us and our trainees. My question, you touched on briefly on microaggressions, kind of the concept of resilience and just learning to basically let it kind of brush off of us. But I think we just curious of your thoughts. There's a lot of work looking to see how, by addressing microaggressions and being aware of them, and how can we be there to support our peers and our trainees when those microaggressions happen. So actually not just let them brush out, but really address them and see if altogether we can not only build that culture, but really be there for the person or the trainee who may have been the subject of microaggression. So I'd love to hear how you balance those two.
Thank you very much. I think that's an absolutely critical point. And in fact, in the last 18 months, there's been a lot of work towards developing training courses for dealing with microaggressions. In fact, there's this fabulous organization called Holla Back, as in shout back, that trains people, offers training on how to intervene when you are observing microaggressions and how to respond to them. And I think that it's really helpful if you feel strong enough, and sometimes it's very difficult, right? But if you feel that you're in a strong enough position to say, you know, what you said was not very kind. I don't know if you realize that. And then setting the record straight and correcting them in the moment. But that is very difficult to do, because if it's your boss, for example, maybe it feels too risky to do that. And so I think that these courses are really helpful. But I think we also have to use our judgment about when to speak up in the moment. Because the truth is that there can be times, and not always, of course, but because, for example, the example that I gave you, that the poor woman was horrified that she had assumed that I was a staff member. I didn't have to say anything to her, like she wanted to crawl under the table, but that's not how it always goes.
Yes, talking about saying nice things, as a Puerto Rican faculty at the University of Puerto Rico School of Medicine, I want to thank you so much. You've made me feel so proud, because everything in your talk, every single word, I have found extremely rich and extremely important, particularly for the students that are here to know the pathway to get ahead. So thank you so very much for your participation, even virtual, or more so because it had to be virtual.
Gracias, hermana Boricua.
América Facundo es mi nombre.
Encantada.
Wonderful. Wonderful. One more question.
Thank you. My name is Bobby Mukamala. I'm here representing the American Medical Association. And thank you for a wonderful presentation. My comment is more based on my experience within our own association, that our membership organization, we ask for people to join us so that we can help solve their problems by dealing with the sources of their anxiety, whether it's prior authorization, whether it's discrimination in the workplace. And internally, another part of my life focuses on mindfulness and trying to build our own resilience, the kind of things you've talked about. Internal to our organization, there's a little bit of a mindset of we can't ask people to join us and then tell them to help themselves. They're joining us so that we can fix the external causes of their problem. And so I'm just curious how you might respond. I personally think that there's value to both. There are some things that won't be solved in my lifetime that I need to build resilience to deal with, and other things that are short term. That's been my go-to response, but I would appreciate your wisdom on what do you say to somebody that gives you that feedback.
Thank you very much. That's a really important point. And I think that you captured it very well, which is that culture change is difficult and it tends to be slow. Whether we like it or not, medicine is very conservative, and it's really difficult to change the culture in medicine. And so we're all working very hard. I'm sure many of you are working at your institutions and organizations, working really hard to change the culture, but it's not going to be overnight. And in the meantime, we do need to provide tools for people to build their resilience. So I think of it not as an either or. We have to do both, but we have to be realistic that culture change is slow. And especially in professions such as medicine, which is so entrenched, we can't expect it to change, to turn on a dime. And I think being realistic is important. And there's no downside to building your own resilience, is what I would say. So I see that we are almost at 12:30, and I unfortunately have a hard stop at 12:30. I just wanted to thank Elizabeth for the invitation and the opportunity, and to thank LMSA also for the opportunity to share with you today some of my own experiences. And I wish you a wonderful, wonderful rest of the conference. Please enjoy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kondo. So I'm going to go ahead and I have a little bit of an ending here. I wanted to give her as much time as she could have, though. So just to wrap up, I'm glad that you all have enjoyed it, and I'm glad there were so many good questions. So I want to just give a shout out to my son, who likes to do my makeup before conferences, but he's not here today. So this was not as great as usual. I want to dedicate this talk again to my cousin, Alejandro, who passed away last spring. And these are some online resources. I put Dr. Quendo's email address. The American Psychiatric Association has a Twitter account. She's also foundation president for the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention. And I have an Instagram account and a Clubhouse account that I am active on. For yourselves, I really like, for those of you who are parents, as a child and adolescent psychiatrist, I highly encourage, if you're, struggling as many parents are with the pandemic and your children in school, Child Mind out of UC Davis has grown their website incredibly, and there's so many wonderful resources on there for parents. UCLA Mindfulness app, Headspace, Shine, and Calm are all wonderful apps that can help you. They're all free, and they can help you with practicing mindfulness daily, especially the UCLA Mindfulness app. Again, I want to talk about the physiciansupportline.com. I missed the line part. And other wonderful resources are ACAP's website, psychsign.org. If we have any medical students or those who mentor medical students who are interested in going into psychiatry, PsychSign is the APA's medical student interest group, and they have their own conferences as well. And NAMI.org is a great advocacy resource. Also, I wanted to just say that next year's national conference will be hosted in the Southeast. This, as This is me. I was, thank you. I was a first-year resident at Jackson Memorial Hospital and helped as a regional advisor to the Southeast. And I just thought it would be a nice picture to show in inviting all of you to the Southeast for next year's national conference. So thank you so much for coming, and really, I'm so happy that you were able to hear Dr. Oquendo's words.